Hi, my name is George Alger, and welcome to today's segment of Our Ventura TV. Today's topic is sacred sexuality, and my guest today is Lynn Creighton, who is a renowned sculptor. Welcome, Lynn.
Hi, glad to be here.
So speak a little bit about being a sculptor so we can frame the rest of the discussion around that.
I love clay, and I love what clay will do, and eventually I found that clay would respond to my interaction to create ecstatic female figures, and that was important to me. By that time I was working with a Native American medicine man who convinced me, and I believe that sexuality was a fundamental part of being human, not something extraneous and to be put to the side. Fundamental in terms of our mind, our bodies, our spirit, our emotions, and our sexuality as being the five basic properties of being human.
Okay, so before we go any further, then, what is sacred sexuality?
Sexuality as sacred is performed as a sacrament and not as a perfunctory or offhand engagement in life. And as I have studied our relationship to sexuality, I found the reason that we don't conduct our sexual experience as a sacrament. I was started with this whole idea by women who came into the purification lodges, the Native American purification lodges that I was leading in and led for more than 20 years. They were coming and praying about abuses in their life, sexual abuses in their life. And so I saw that so much that I had to begin to pay attention to it. And so what I discovered was that our attitude to sexuality was radically changed in our history 5,000 years ago. Up until 5,000 years ago, there were 20 or 30,000 years of goddess worshiping in which sexuality was the main source of celebration and honoring the goddess. And the act, or the sacrament of sacred sexuality was performed in the temple as a tribute to the goddess.
Wow, okay, so this is a lot to...
That was a big step,
to grasp here, right? So let's chop this down into little pieces here, okay? So first of all, so I can easily see how abuse of women would not align with the concept of sexuality being sacred at all. But for instance, even promiscuity. So I imagine promiscuity would certainly not be an aspect of sacred sexuality. Okay,
That's
cool. Now, in terms of the, let's just bring it back to your sculpture for a moment. So did the sculptor, being a sculptor, did that precede the whole concept of the message of sacred sexuality?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So you started as being a sculptor.
Yes.
And the message evolved afterwards.
And I really, I had a commitment to being an artist as someone who would have something to say, that my artwork would not be trivial. And that I committed myself to as I finished graduate school. This is work that is serious, and I want to use it as a way of expressing something that is important to me. So that was my original reason for apprenticing to a Native American medicine man, to educate myself, to come to an understanding of not only what my life was about, but what all life was about. And that was how I was introduced to the idea that sexuality was sacred.
Okay, so your artwork, though, has become, it's been exhibited all over the world, and, does have a very notable style, in some cases very provocative, okay? So the message, though, is a primary thing. The message of sacred sexuality is really would you say, the primary purpose of your life?
now. And I don't think it was as I started my work as a sculptor, in making the ecstatic female figures, and we should have one here. I don't know what happened. But what that was a way of expressing the idea that the feminine had a right to explore the power of what it is, and that right has been curtailed as sexuality has become more and more profane. And it happened over a period, that has happened over a period of 5,000 years.
Okay, and then you might have made a statement earlier that something happened 5,000 years ago.
Something
what
happened.
Was that?
The Indo-Europeans began to invade across the Caucasus into the Fertile Crescent of the Mediterranean, the Tigris and Euphrates, where the goddess was being worshipped without weapons and without fortifications. And the Indo-Europeans were already warring people. They came with weapons, they came with iron weapons and chariots and horses, and they were bigger people, they were meat-eating people, and they easily overpowered these actually many cultures really of goddess worshippers in that area, also along the Danube, and superimposed their own religion on the goddess worshippers.
Okay.
They brought with them the god from the volcanoes surrounding the areas that they had originally occupied.
Okay, so obviously there's plenty of examples in history where warring factions have come in and changed cultures, but let's speak a little bit about what it is, the goddesses and the goddess worshippers. Speak to me about that.
Well, to me it's like mind-blowing that we consider the goddess worshippers as a segment of history that we don't pay much attention to. But they were 20 or 30,000 years, different people say different things, but 20 or 30,000 years of the original development of civilization. So the archaeological finds of original man, the Paleolithic and the Neolithic were all goddess-worshipping cultures.
And what does that actually mean, goddess worshipping? So in other words, were there actual physical incarnations of women that people considered to be gods, or was this a feminine view of a god?
As far as I can understand, what I understand is that the woman created new life. Fundamentally important to the development of civilization was more people. And it appeared to be a magical reality. New life was coming out of the woman. So for that reason, the devotion of the feminine was created. She creates new life. Not only does she create new life, but she sustains life. She nourishes it. Not only does she nourish life, but she understands that the death will create another new life. And so there's an honoring of the death and a way of integrating that into the society. And in the whole kind of honoring of the human birth, the relationship of the people, the understanding of the relationship of the peoples to their environment grew around the cycles of life. So the moon was important, and the fact that women's menstruation was related in its time period to the moon, that was very important. Caves became very important because they were earth manifestations of the vagina, and celebrations occurred in the caves around the sacrament of life occurring.
Okay, so this is cool, but let me just make sure I can articulate this in this way. So the goddess worshiping that you're referring to is worshiping, in fact, the power of femininity.
Yeah, I would say so. Yes, the goddess was understood as the creator of everything, because of woman's ability to create new life. So that was engendered in the deity.
Okay, so whether there was one or multiple deities, the idea was that the female represents the one deity or multiple deities, but is it a female god that people are worshiping, or it is really femininity in general as a just a part of culture?
Well, this question of whether it's femininity would not have been their question.
Okay.
Their question, as I understand it, would have been, what is sacred? Life is sacred.
Interesting.
And where does it come from? It comes from the woman.
Okay.
So who is our greatest, who do we give our greatest tribute to? The one who gives us life. Now, this mother here, gave life to this child, but who at the beginning did it? It had to be a feminine. Our life had to come through a feminine entity.
Okay.
So the creatrix, the great creatrix, was feminine, because obviously the woman creates life.
Okay, got it. So in fact, there was a whole cultural, I'm presuming here, cultural meaning men and women, who esteemed females in general because of their life-giving aspect to
That's
them.
right.
And whatever they considered to be God would naturally be of a female perspective. Okay.
Now, it's very strange to me how hard it is to grasp this, because in reality, now this is where what I'm saying is rather revolutionary today, but what is contrived, in my mind, what is contrived is that a God creates life. And in fact, as I look at the history, that was contrived. And it was made to be superimposed over the goddess worshippers who already existed in the Fertile Crescent of the Mediterranean.
Okay. Well, believe it or not, we're just about out of time here, okay? So before we end, though, is there a summating message you'd like to convey to the viewers?
Yes. This history, I think we have to know. In order for us to recognize that the balance between the genders in our culture is askew on purpose, because of something that happened 5,000 years ago. The goddess was killed and the god was superimposed.
That does give one a different perspective on history. Lynn, thank you very much for joining me.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be here.
This is George Alger signing off for this segment of Our Ventura TV. Until we meet again.